Hi, this is the first of three SchemaPlay videos on the subject of the three pillars of sustainable development. And a good place to start is to think about why pillars. In this case, we're using the example of a three-legged stool because it's so obvious that if one of these pillars, the economic aspect or a sociocultural or the environmental considerations, are not taken into account in any decision making, the stool would be unstable. And that's really the point that's being made. The fact that they are interdependent and all three need to be taken into consideration. We are talking about sustainable development, not economic development. And in this video, I'm not going to address the question of whether economic development is appropriate in sustainability. The model dates back to at least the 80s, and it was included in the Brundtland report at the time when sustainability was defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So it's been with us from the start, and economics is a part of that because it's a factor that needs to be taken into consideration when we make decisions at a local, national or an individual level. Many of the products and many of the options open to us, the normal pricing does not include some of the side effects or environmental, social, cultural implications of their use. So we need to take into consideration all three. And it was popularized in the 80s and the 70s when a lot of public sector expenditure projects were under serious criticism. At the time I'm making this video, the Grenfell Tower inquiry is taking place, so we're very much aware of some of the dangers of high-rise housing. But right from the early days of their implementation, the implications for community cohesion, for the effects on crime, local crime, and the effects on the environment were already well known and heavily criticised. So an economic decision predominantly was leading to problems with the environment and society. There are many other examples we could use. Millennium Dome is one of those. Ultimately, it was paid for by British taxpayers, and it was sold on for £1 in its lifetime. Of course, it will never recover its costs. Decision making has to take into consideration all these factors every time. Today we've got HS2. With sustainable consumption, the same applies. So if we're going to be buying some expensive household good like a washing machine, we need to take into consideration the environmental impact, how it's going to actually work and be used in the household, as well as the price. And energy rating recordings on devices help us make those decisions. Most of the energy, I think 90% of all the energy that goes into the use of a washing machine is for the heating. So one of the ways that we can use a washing machine more efficiently and more sustainably is to make colder washes. So it's not just to do with buying the products, it's about the use of them as well. Many of us are considering finding other ways of using transport, and public transport is obviously the most sustainable option, but individual cars have become part of our culture, and there are sustainable options to us that we can consider and look at the environmental and social cultural implications of those. Probably the biggest challenge for most householders today is heating, and a very large amount of the expenditure of energy bills for every household is made up of heating, and predominantly it's gas fired heating that's being used in Britain today. And the alternatives to that are expensive, and it'd be difficult to justify on most household levels their implementation right now. Government really has a role to play in making it more economic for the future. and they've done that before, and it's a fairly straightforward thing to do when it comes to new builds. It's a lot harder to do with retrofitting. So in conclusion, the three pillars provides a means to remind us that all of these factors need to be taken into consideration equally: the environmental aspects, the socio-cultural and the economic. And in terms of the curriculum, there are things to learn about each area as well. What are the environmental concerns of the day? What are the socio-cultural risks and issues that need to be addressed? And also about economics and how economic decision making can be made. But the crucial thing is that they're interdependent and that all three need to be balanced. So children increasingly need the experience of problem solving using the model. In the early years, it'll be parents and practitioners who share with the young children their own decision making in these terms and illustrating that good practice. Biologically, sustainability is actually all about survival, and in the next video we'll show how the ecological perspective provides insights into life more generally. And in the final video we'll talk about how cognitive and neuroscientists are increasingly using a model very similar to this to understand cognitive development, embedded cognition, and to address an ecological perspective on child development and learning.